People who have rage quit a job on the spot. What happened? Story 1. I told my boss I was miscarrying and needed to go to the hospital. She said I needed to wait until the end of my shift. I was a receptionist for a real estate agency. I walked out and never came back. Story 2. I asked my boss if she could give me a schedule instead of expecting me to be on call from 6 in the morning to 10 at night Monday through Sunday. She acted like I was asking her for 6 months of paid time off and then said no, and I never went back. Story 3. Retail. 2 weeks before Christmas. I live somewhere it snows a lot, and at the time took the bus to work. The roads were very bad and the buses were running late. My phone was dead. The battery didn't keep a charge very long anymore, but I couldn't afford a new one. I run in as fast as I can, apologize profusely and explain. My boss tears me a new one. Fine. I brush it off and get on the sales floor quickly. I picked up every shift dropped at this place. I was only part-time, and I needed the money. I could be relied on to come in last minute just about always. I was never late or missed shifts ever. This was the first time I see her take out the schedule binder, which reminds me I have a DR appointment the following week. I tell her the day and time. She asks me what it's for. I pause because that's a weird thing to ask, but also because where I live you can't ask by law. I tell her that's none of her business and she can't ask me that. She tells me if I'm going to screw her over at Christmas it is her business. That was it. I marched to the back room, got my things and walked right out saying now you're screwed and flipped her. I really needed that job and the money, but I didn't need to be treated that way. Not long after, that manager was fired. The new replacement called me to come back, and I did. Story 4. I was working at a restaurant and a few of the staff told me the owner will sometimes mess with their timesheets and to watch out for that. Upon hearing that, I immediately went to the owner and told him I don't take that sort of thing lightly. He assured me that he would never do that and I went back to work but kept all my punch receipts. Payday comes and I see my check was rounded down something small like 27 hours from 40, 27 down to 40 or something. I go straight to the owner and told him I quit. He starts yelling that's only like 50 cents. I need you tomorrow. And I say that's my 50 cents. I told you don't with my money, then walked out. Story 5. I was in a call center selling mobile subscriptions. I was real good at it Oswell. But after about a year the burnout was real. It was a summer day and my friends were out day drinking not even 500 MOA. At lunch the boss pulls us all into our after lunch meeting. He starts calling me out for not calling enough, not talking long enough and not selling enough, right in front of everybody. He ended the sentence with do you even want to be here and tbh a light bulb just turned on in my head. I told him no I did not, took my jacket and left. The best mic drop moment Eve had. My coworkers called me after and told me he just stood there in disbelief, and I of course went day drinking with my friends instead. Best day ever. Edit spelling. Story 6. My new team leader was an idiot and an unpleasant person, so I was thinking about leaving anyway, but the final straw was her firing someone for taking too many days off for his chemotherapy. When it was announced, I just stood up, told her she was a terrible person, and that I quit, and left. Then phoned my partner on the way home to explain why I was now unemployed very long time ago now, and it all worked out in the end. Last time I heard, the guy was still fit and healthy, so all is well. Story 7. I was 15 and my parents made me get my first job at a local chain store. I was in charge of walking around for 8 hours a day and facing the shelves, which basically meant all of the product was at the front of the shelves. The manager of my department was a guy who seemed to be a journeyman for the company contracted to move from store to store. His personal skills were lacking and it was obvious even when I was 15. Imagine a man who looked like Bam Margera and was sober wearing a polo and always walked fast. Anyways, I was on the floor facing the shelves and a guy I worked with older than me, probably like 20 to 24, and he needed the job. We were talking to each other quietly as we were doing a task right next to each other. Nobody was around. Bam walked by and immediately summoned us to the back of the store. I knew we were in trouble by the way he spoke to us. The guy proceeded to explain to us we are never allowed to talk during our work. I don't know how to explain it, but something about the way he spoke felt like being scolded by an angry principal. Before I could say a word the guy I worked with was extremely apologetic and said he was sorry and it won't happen again. Bam looks at me for a similar apology and I told him, fuck you, and I walked out. Not sure if I'm in this situation, but I was 15 and I was pissed and a no talking at work policy seemed unreasonable. Story 8. Not me but my husband. Before we got married he was paid a flat salary, no overtime pay, but he was promised time off in place of overtime. He worked non-stop. I mean there were days when he wouldn't go home, he'd just work through from 8 a.m. to past midnight the next night. His record, there was 110 hours worked in 1 week. He would go home to feed the cat or get groceries. They wouldn't even let him go home to shower when he pulled all-nighters. One time he asked me to shave his head in the garden because he didn't have time to go to the barber, and while I was doing it I realized he'd fallen asleep. While I was shaving his head with those clipper things that are loud and vibrate against your skull, he took a day off once and his one manager even went to his house to find out why he wasn't at work even though he'd notified the office. His landlord yelled at the guy and accused him of slavery. Anyway, he eventually lost it one night. He was told to work overtime to meet an insane deadline for a massive national event that was coming up, and when he expressed frustration about something, the other manager took his glasses off, got in his face and asked, "You want to hit me?" So he put his office keys on the desk and said, You're on your own, and walked. The manager was stressed, calling him, begging him, offered him $10K just to work that night. He even called me and begged me to convince my husband to go back to work. I told him to eat. Story 9. My manager verbally berated one of my coworkers and friends for running drinks from the bar instead of being at the host's stand. She was asked by another manager to help run drinks. And this manager was so abusive it brought this sweet girl who was just trying to help to tears. I decided right there I was done but wanted a little petty revenge on top. They were always short on bartenders. And I was the only one scheduled in the bar the following night on a Friday. I came in 20 minutes before my shift and told that manger that I won't be working as of now because of the way she treats her employees. Story 10. My nonverbal autistic client was becoming increasingly aggressive because her dad was insisting that her direct support professionals, 2 other women and me, take her out for a total of 10 hours a day. Sometimes, people just want to relax and be at home, and she was no different. Anyway, she suddenly freaked out and grabbed me by the hair and started yanking me around in the middle of JCPenney. A stranger had to help calm her down and get her off of me. At this point, I was 2 months behind in being paid, and her dad kept telling me the money was coming. I wasn't going to accept getting beat up at work for free, so I drove her home, left her with her brother because the dad was out of town at a conference, and quit. I told the woman who worked the shift after me about what happened, and she quit in solidarity with me. Story 11. Worked for the city of Manhattan Beach, sweeping the Strand, from El Porto to Hermosa Beach. There was a crew of 4 of us and our supervisor, a woman whose name escapes me now. She wasn't the problem. Her boss was the problem. He micromanaged all of us every day. No matter what we did, we were doing it wrong. What was wrong with us? What a bunch of loser. Just what you'd expect from a loser city that allowed to be hired, etc., etc., etc. One day, ID had enough. I said, this is bullshit. I'm going to quit. My friend Dan said, hey, you can't quit without me quitting. His brother Rob said, you can't quit without me quitting. The other guy, Tom, was like, well, if you're all going to quit, I'm going to quit too. And our supervisor was like, hey, you can't all quit just like that. Oh wait, you can it? I'm going back to college in 3 weeks anyway. Let's go. We got in the maintenance truck, drove to the city building, and quit en masse. And true to form, our supposed manager basically laughed at us and said, he'll have a new crew hired by Monday. We later found out he got fired, which was nice, but we still weren't going to go back because it was a job anyway. OL small non-profit hired a new COO who sucked up to the director. Director liked having her ego stroked, and made our lives to give in to CO's whims. The last nail was when she mocked my boss, a very qualified, hard-working, kind, and efficient program head, because she was taking care of her extremely sick husband at the height of COVID and caught COVID herself. Director called my boss lazy for actually resting during her sick leave. Unlike our CO, who was apparently still working while sick COO tested positive but had no symptoms, and she was only signing documents which my boss had prepared while actually being in bed with fever, the director didn't know this. Furthermore, the director said, this is how it's going to be from now on. If you don't like it, I want your resignation by the end of the day. Half of the total staff quit on spot. F that lady and her up team. All of us are much better off now. Story 12. My manager was a bleach blonde nutjob who only had her position because daddy owned the restaurant chain. I was the assistant manager and basically ran the place while she sat in a booth and chatted with friends all day. 3 weeks before my exit, she hired her friend, who had no restaurant experience, to be a waitress. 2 weeks after that, she got married for the second time. She was 24 and was to take off on her honeymoon a week later. 2 days before she was to leave, she left me a note in the office telling me that her new waitress friend was going to be in charge of the restaurant's zero experience managing anything while she was gone. The next day, I walked in at the start of my shift and walked up to the table where she, her new husband, and daddy were sitting and talking. I dropped my keys on the table and told her that I wasn't about to be managed by some idiot she dragged in off the street 3 weeks ago. Her father asked what I meant, and I realized she hadn't told him about her decision. I briefly explained and then left. As I walked away, I heard him tell her that she created the problem and now she had to solve it, and that, if that was going to ruin her honeymoon, that was her fault. Story 13. I was sick of working 95-hour weeks with zero appreciation. I got called on the carpet for someone else's mistake and they blamed me. I was like, oh no, and quit on the spot. They called me being very apologetic a week later and asked me to come back. They were going to have to hire 2 people to do my job. Technical writer who always made the deadlines, even if I was up for 2 days straight. So, I negotiated a pretty big raise, a title and an extra week vacation per year. I stayed another 3 years. Story 14. I asked off one day for my freshman orientation at college. Boss told me I had to make a tough decision. Either I wanted to work or I didn't. I'm sorry, minimum wage at a pet store or going to college. You got me messed up. I never went back. Story 15. A new restaurant owner forced the kitchen to remain open after the fume hood died during a hot summer night. We made it through half the dinner rush before the chef had to be evac to the hospital. My manager said she totally understood when I quit. I don't think she was in a spot to quit as well, but it was written on her face that she wanted to. It was obvious the new owner bought the location without any intention to invest a single additional cent into it. He squeezed every last penny out of G Place before shutting it down 6 months after the hood fiasco. A real shame. That place was super busy before he took over. I like to imagine he overpaid for it, and it ruined him when he treated his employees like rodents. Story 16. I managed an ICU for all of 3 months after working there for years. The director of nursing effectively told me to send people home early despite not having much wiggle room already. She twisted my arm, so I did. Then, the dawn offloaded ER patients into the ICU so the numbers would look better before night shift. These ER patients did not need ICU-level help. She made these decisions an hour apart. Then, someone had a heart attack elsewhere in the hospital, and my now very short-staffed unit had to go to that patient. And we had this absolute clusterfuck at the end of a long 13-hour shift. When I confronted her, as well as other admin, about their ability to with my nurses and our patients, they literally told me to stop talking, because they wanted to move on to a new point. I chucked my badge and told them when the lawsuits come cause someone else died, you'll be long gone you. I left and went back to bedside nursing the next week elsewhere. Was working at a bar pizza restaurant, only 2 people in the kitchen normally, but on that day the other guy called out, so I was on my own, and my boss said shed help. Basically it just got ludicrously busy. 2 giant families came in. There was a birthday party in another section, all the bar orders. By help my boss actually meant, just tell me what she thinks I should be prioritizing whenever she waltzed through the kitchen. That had been bothering me all day. And the final straw was when she came back to tell me there was another big group here with no clean table to sit at, also my job. I just stared her in the eyes while untying my apron, dropped it on the ground and walked out without saying a word. Story 17. I went on holiday for a week, and the company sent a replacement to operate my 25-ton excavator. When I came back, my team told me the guy had absolutely no idea how to operate heavy machinery and had nearly killed someone. When they confronted him about his experience, he admitted he didn't have much. Despite my 20 years of experience, he was paid more than I was, so I called my boss for clarification. They said they couldn't pay me more, so I simply switched off my machine and went home. It took them 4 months and multiple drivers to find the right person. After a few weeks, the new driver struck a fiber optic cable, leading to a hefty fine and stopping the project for several weeks. In the end, they went over budget and finished late, but I guess they were happy that they stood their ground with me. Story 18. My boss had a habit of jumping to conclusions with no evidence. He did this one time too many, blamed me for his mistake, and called me to his office and screamed at me until he was red in the face. I went home and never came back. Story 19. I worked at a call center for a shitty dial-up provider in like 2008. I worked nights to supplement my day job income, which was low because I was an intern. They had super shady cancellation practices. Customers had to jump through hoops and it was borderline impossible to cancel. After like 2 weeks I got a call from a woman whose elderly father tried and failed to cancel many months prior and had racked up all kinds of stupid finance charges and was in collections. She was so sweet and almost in tears because they simply couldn't afford it. I quit on the spot. I called the manager a greasy piece of and walked out, and called the lady back on my personal cell and apologized and told her how to get out of paying it. Story 20. Wrote a company-wide email putting the owner CEO and his VP on blast for how horrible they and the company were. I got very personal with it. Wrote it as I waited for HR to cut my final check. I set it to delayed delivery so everyone would get it just as they came back from lunch. I caused a company-wide meeting to happen in response. LOL. It felt so good. Story 21. Worked at a restaurant doing like 10-hour shifts. They had me prep, dishwash, and cook. I couldn't take a proper lunch because if I did would pile up worse than it already was. Nobody helped me with. They made me work Thanksgiving and Christmas. Managers would be standing around talking when they could have helped me. My raise was 25 cents. One day I woke up and just said that and just stopped going in. Story 22. My daughter was just born 2 weeks ago and I said I couldn't work overtime anymore and they said they needed me to get my priorities straight and if I can't be there when they need me, they don't want me. I stood up and shook his hand and said I guess this is it then, good luck, and walked out. I kept the rage inside, but it just about broke out when I received an email 20 minutes later about his shock and disappointment, that I chose spending time with my newborn over his business. Story 23. I was a 15-year-old dishwasher and showed up to an overflowing sink full of dishes cause the afternoon guy called out. The grown men at the job were underachieving losers who either relentlessly teased me or harassed me. After an hour of my shift of being picked on by men in their 30s, I had enough. I walked over to the punch clock, picked up my time card and held it high in the air. I locked eyes with the biggest bully and saw his face change from laughter to surprise, and he said, No, don't clock out. I said, have fun doing those dishes. Clocked out and never went back. Story 24. I was called in to cover a 4 a.m. shift. When I showed up, someone else was already there to cover it. I went home to sleep until my scheduled 11 a.m. shift. Apparently someone else had been called in to cover me because I was covering the 4 a.m. shift. I quit and walked out at 11:05 a.m. Story 25. My first job. I was working at Incredible Corruption, Incredible Connection. For those that don't know it, my first payslip didn't even pay for my petrol to get to the job. Okay, fine. I'm new and it's a sales consultant job. If I make more sales I'll get more pay. 2 weeks later some dude comes in claiming he's building a tech school. Wants to buy 15 laptops. I get him organized with decent laptops just slightly over his budget. The store manager comes out and closes out the deal because it's so big and I'm so new. Payday comes around and my payslip is even lower than the first month, despite making loads of sales. I inquire why with the store manager. He umps and ahs and says hell, discuss it later. The lead floor salesman pulls me aside and tells me what's actually going on. Those laptops were sold below cost price. I.e. the store was losing money on each sale of those laptops. My contract stated I made 8 of profit or loss. So by selling those laptops I was eating into my commission. 2 hours later store manager confirms that is the case. 10 minutes later I had my immediate resignation printed, signed and submitted. Yes, I'm blacklisted from working there, so what? I've actively redirected all potential customers to competitors for the last 10 years. Since I'm in IT, that's a fair few people. Story 26, sort of a rage quit. It's a long story, but it explains why I stuck around for as long as I did. In college I started working for this family that owned a few restaurants by school, like pizzeria, deli, very casual sit-down places. They were popular, did a good business, and it was a great place to work. Two brothers ran basically 5 different stores, which were mainly staffed with college kids. Great guys, treated everyone great, fun workplace with the usually restaurant hijinks and drama, and the type of place you would stick your head into even on your days off just so you didn't miss whatever happened that day. The dad who had started the business was doing a pair of dimes upstate for some funny business involving a pizzeria and certain friends of his years prior. 2 or 3 years after I started working there, he got out, and would frequently come and hang around. Nice guy, always funny stories, we got along great. He didn't involve himself in the business. I actually think he wasn't allowed to per his parole, and to the best of my knowledge he followed all of his probation requirements until the day he died. By this point I had worked just about every job from delivery driver to pizza maker in their little empire, and was more or less what you would consider a GM. The business was run cleanly, although I strongly suspect there was a second set of books which was common in places like that at the time. I do have some really funny stories though involving the Italian Jewish-Amish triad of off-the-books flour and milk though. After I graduated college I stayed on with them. I was honestly making more money there than at my first real job in my career. It was still a fun place, and they just let me do my thing. I'd pop in a few times a week into the various places on my way home from work for an hour or two to see how things were going, did the ordering and scheduling for the places, handled the staffing, and then a couple of hours a day on the weekends or filling in for someone in a pinch. It was great. Aside from the extra cash, it meant free food too, and again I really liked the brothers and the folks I worked with, and had actually been the one that hired like 80 of the staff by this point. The brothers by this time had opened a real restaurant and all of their attention was on it. The stores as we called them were pretty much on autopilot. After maybe 2 years of this, thing started to change. The brothers would tend to poach the best people from the stores to work at the restaurant. No problem, their business, I get it, but it left me constantly trying to fill positions and started affecting the dynamic of the stores. They were quite as fun as they used to be. We started getting more of the drama common in the business, and honestly, it became harder to hire people who weren't complete fuck-ups for whatever reason, despite paying well and having a reputation in the college of being a great place to work. My career was also in full swing and started to require more of my attention. I was trying to scale back my duties while we found someone who would take over my role. We called it my retirement, but I was burning out. The father, Tony Sr., started pitching in more and helping out, but he was a 70-year-old Italian guy who hadn't been in the real world for 20 years, so I was still watching over his shoulder. These guys had been great to me for so many years, treated me like family, and I wanted to do right by them. Finally, early one Saturday morning it all comes to a head. I'm laying in bed with a girl I had just started dating, a bit hungover, and looking forward to doing pretty much nothing when I get a call that 2 of the guys who were supposed to be at the stores can't make it in the morning, and we need someone to accept deliveries at both. So I grumpily agree to go in with a seriously guys, this is the last time we need to find someone else now, so I drive half an hour over to one of the stores, get out of my car half awake, and out of nowhere this big goose I never saw before comes at me and attacks me. Aside from drawing blood, this thing pretty much molested me. And it was the last straw. I called back the son and was, Tony, I'm taking the deliveries, he'll put anything cold away, them I'm locking back up behind me, he'll call in sick to my job at Monday, and we can sit down and go over everything and I'm done. It's time for me to move on and I do just that. Later that day, I get a call from the father, Tony Sr. line, it's taken care of, we really want you to still part of this, you set your schedule, you set the rules, think of the stores like your business, you're like family. Well, pay you more too. What do you mean it's taken care of? You find someone. What? No, but I heard what happened and I was pissed. I went over there and took care of things and got everything straightened out. Okay, well I appreciate it, Tony. I don't know, I'm talking with your son on Monday, we will sort it all out then. Okay, line, just know it's all taken care of, your family man, we really appreciate all you have done for us over the years. So I hang up confused, with no idea what this old guy is talking about, but figure it will sort itself all out on Monday when I talk to the son. On Monday, I find out that Tony Sr. taking care of things meant him angrily storming to his car with a shovel, while his wife yelled, "Stop, you'll go back to prison," and driving 2 hours, to beat the ever-loving out of the goose with a shovel in the parking lot. I like to think he got the right goose, but one really can't be sure. Part of me appreciated the gesture, but I still left, still talk with them and drop in all the time. 30 years later, Tony Sr. has moved on to the afterlife with the goose. I'm sure that was a fun reunion. The restaurant actually became a really big success and their kids grew up to take over the stores, but the vibe isn't the same as it was all those years ago. They run it like a business now, compared to whatever it was when we ran things. But every now and then I think about how that just flipped a switch in Tony Sr., and how he basically recreated Pesky's death from Casino, with a goose, in our parking lot. Story 27. The school district had barely given me enough resources to teach a lesson. School administration was refusing to acknowledge an out-of-the-ordinary, extreme behavioral case in my class, and I was so overworked I was on the verge of a mental breakdown. My plan was to keep being the best teacher I could be for my students for the rest of the year, but quiet quit, when it came to all the useless meetings and paperwork. When they announced they were moving the last 7 hired teachers to the worst schools in the district, without warning partway through the year, and only giving me 2 days to move my classroom, I just told them nah, I quit, and that was that. Story 28. I worked in a well-known hotel chain in the UK and was the night shift manager and only one on staff there. A new area manager started and instantly disliked me. Daily I had to clean the hotel, not part of my job spec, had to do additional tasks which were her jobs. I was also removed from a range of trainings the rest of the team received, and then told off when I didn't attend this training I knew nothing about, or told off for not understanding something new, which was part of this training I wasn't part of. I was basically being pushed out of my job with small things. I then found a document in her office outlining long-term removing of me and replacing me printed emails. I waited for an evening. I knew she was at a work event out drinking away from town. I wrote a note on the check-in desk, more or less the wording of the night shift manager has quit. I'm sure the area manager will be pleased of this. Here's her number if you wish to check in. Left her mobile number, left the pile of emails on the front desk and walked out. I caught up with someone who worked there a few weeks later. This is what ended up happening. Guests started checking themselves into their rooms with the keys next to the desk. Guests were ringing the area manager non-stop. Her phone was off. The main guest service phone was closed due to being after 6 p.m., so no one could get hold of the hotel chain. Once the area manager's phone was turned off, she apparently had a stupid amount of texts and answer messages from guests. The bigger managers were with her, so got involved instantly, albeit while drunk. Big investigation took place where the top managers came in and basically turned the hotel over, checking everything. I got an apology by email from that manager for everything, offered my job back, all of which I ignored. She got fired for the evidence they found. Also turned out she was selling drugs from the hotel on her shifts, which they found evidence of. I was 18 at the time. I just couldn't be arsed anymore. Feel bad for the guests looking back. Glad she lost her job though, Yolorna. I went to visit my mom, who got very sick and required 2 hospitalizations and a surgery, and I took an unexpected unpaid leave to help her out with her dog's house while she was healing in hospital. During that unpaid leave I was being harassed multiple times a day by a toxic colleague, my boss. The job paid terribly. I was treated poorly throughout my time working there, despite going well above and beyond what my role was. The multiple texts and emails every day while I was caring for my sick mother in another country sent me over the edge. I got back home over a weekend and went into the office and packed everything up. My first day back, I waited in HR's office for an hour for my boss to arrive, who was over an hour late, before giving HR my fob and official notice effective immediately. Story 29. Well, it wasn't exactly raging, but I got offered 30 more pay and a company truck. When I told my boss about the offer, he said I can't match that. 2 weeks earlier he had bought his teenage son a pickup truck that cost the same as my condo. I said well then I'm gone, and started the new job the next day. Story 30. My boss had me hire someone to cover maternity leave. Without telling me or the new hire it was a temporary position. She did really good work, and when the other lady was due to return, he explained and told me to lay her off. We argued about the ethics of it, which culminated in me yelling well she can have my job then, and tossing my keys on his desk and walking out. Years later, both those ladies had moved on and I was asked to come back, which I did with a very clear understanding of ethical boundaries, and no such issues have come up in the 8 or so years I've been there since then. As much as that situation sucked, it is really cool to see how much my boss has grown as a person, and thinking maybe I played some part in sparking that growth. Story 31. I wouldn't call it rage, but I was a part-time employee who for over 6 months was working full-time hours and was the only employee who did closing in the kitchen. New management came in and refused to hire new people and kept expecting more and more from me. I was having panic attacks every shift and was overly stressed out. I was doing a job alone that should have been 2 people minimum. A day before my 1-year anniversary, which happened to be Christmas Eve, I had another panic attack because the orders wouldn't stop coming. The person who worked before me never did their job, and as I went to go restock the food bar I saw they didn't prepare anything for me and I lost it. Told my manager everything I was thinking and that I just couldn't do it anymore. She asked me to stay because she had big plans to fix everything. Told her no and walked out. From what I heard she left about a year later and the whole store is being ran by junkies. Thank God I left. Story 32. SME business. Initially boss was great. I was rarely in the office, except Friday arvos to drop job cards off, grab the next week's cards and parts. Got through my work a little quicker one week, walk in and the office crew are literally all getting shouted at because of a mistake. I'm like WDF, quietly asked one at the periphery what's happening. She tells me that he's going apeshit because an install we're in the middle of had gone sideways but didn't know which one. I knew straight away which one because I'd spoken with one of the blokes on that job earlier in the week. Head told me the client had changed specs and the scope of the job a month prior. It was now a much bigger job and we didn't have enough gear on site to complete it on time. Head contacted the boss to let him know via phone and email listing the extra gear required. Well, guess what? Shock horror, fuckknuckle never ordered the extra gear, leaving the techs on the job with their hanging out in the breeze. Blood boiled and a red mist descended and I went off, telling him precisely what I thought of him and his tirade. Grabbed my personal gear out of the company Uta, threw my keys at him, told him that I quit and walked. Competitor heard about it and offered me a job the next week. Story 33. Worked for an emperor-themed pizza chain. The management one day decided, in the middle of summer, to enact a policy where you couldn't come into the back of the store if you weren't in uniform, a black uniform. In the Las Vegas area when days get to over 110F, I happened to be one of several employees who rode a bike or walked to work. There was also no public bathroom, and the only bathroom was accessible from the back area. Well, I stopped in early to drop my backpack off just inside the door to the back area, so I could go over to Walmart in the same parking lot. I open the door and the manager screams at me, "You can't be back here if you aren't in uniform," in front of about 20 or so customers and started cursing. I said nothing, took my bag, and went over to the Walmart anyway while I worked out my thoughts. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me that this minimum wage position just came with so much emotional abuse. I finished my shopping, went back to my work, and just turned to my uniform and name tag. I told my coworker at the front counter that nobody deserves that kind of verbal abuse. In my mind, my manager was extremely unprofessional, and by continuing to work there I'd be an accomplice to her behavior, and I didn't want to remain complicit. Got another job like 3 days later, still jank pay, but it was better than minimum wage. I never went back, even for the 5 pizzas.